We made it. Last video in the series. Yay! We talked about the female anatomy, what it is, how it works. We talked about the male anatomy, what it is, how it works. Hopefully we learned some new things that we didn't before. I know I did. Last one, hopefully should be significantly shorter. We're going to talk about the talk. We're going to talk about what happens when you get older. We're going to talk about where these tissues come from during embryonic development, and that'll be it. So I guess let's just go ahead and go right into it. Sexual function is governed by the autonomic nervous system. That means that's the unconscious control branch that does breathing, heart rate, stuff like that. Okay. The autonomic nervous system controls both male and female reproductive systems. When we're talking about sexual function, we are talking about sexual intercourse, sex. Sexual intercourse is the introduction of semen into the female reproductive tract so that we can have fertilization and then ultimately pregnancy. Because remember, the function of the reproductive system is to continue the human species, or whatever species you are studying. Dogs, cats, chickens, lizards, whatever. That's the point. And so with sexual reproduction, you have an egg, you have a sperm, you have to get them together. The human reproductive system is how we've done that. And this whole process is governed by our nervous system, by the autonomic nervous system. Male sexual function is coordinated by complex neural reflexes that we're not really going to get into a whole lot, but it has to do with back and forth between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Actual arousal is you see an increase in the parasympathetic outflow over the pelvic nerves that leads to erection, sending blood into those erectile tissues, so on and so forth. Let's see, it's actual stimulation. You start, the bulbourethral glands start, they start secreting their fluids, getting everything ready for the impending fertilization. At least for physiologically, that's what your body's hoping for. It lubricates the spongy urethra and the surface of the glands to allow sperm to travel through those structures more easily, which eventually goes to emission. That is the semen going into the penis. Ejaculation is when it leaves the body and it goes external. Emission occurs under sympathetic stimulation. Peristaltic contractions in the ampullae of the ductus differentia, the ductus differens. Those are those ducts that transport the sperm away from the testes. The ampullae are those parts where everything starts to join together right before it gets to the prostate. These contractions are going to push seminal fluid and sperm into the prostatic urethra, where it comes in contact with the the secretions from the seminal glands in the prostate. The things are going to mix and get moved down the urethra. You've got sympathetic contractions of the urinary bladder and the internal urethral sphincter. That's going to keep semen from going into the bladder. We don't want to have that. We only want mixing where it's permitted. And then it leaves. That's what ejaculation is. Rhythmic contractions of the ischiocavernosus and the bulbospongiosus muscles. Those are muscles, and I don't think we really mentioned in the male video. They're located in a similar place as females. These are the muscles more or less responsible for moving things through those various canals and cavities and stuff like that. So these muscles are going to force blood into that erectile tissue, which is going to stiffen the penis and move semen towards the external urethral opening. This stimulation is also going to cause pleasurable sensations known as orgasm. And then afterwards, you have what's known as the resolution phase, heart rate and blood pressure. Because remember, let's back up to December, okay? Sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight, okay? Blood pressure, heart rate, those increase. Once you have gone past that, your heart rate and your blood pressure are going to go back down to normal. Blood is going to leave the erectile tissue in a process known as detumescence, which I didn't know that until I was studying this. So everybody's learning something today. That is the process of losing the erection. The blood is going to start draining out of those erectile tissues back into general circulation and stuff like that. If this doesn't work properly, you may have a condition known as erectile dysfunction, also known as ED. It is also called impotence. However, it's not really called that so much anymore, especially in medical circles. You hear ED a lot. And this is the inability to achieve or maintain an erection. And there's many different factors, physiological, blood pressure issues can lead to it, stuff like that. Psychological factors, stress, anxiety, stuff like that can lead to this. Are we talking about females now? All right. So in females, we're activating the parasympathetic pathways. That's going to lead to engorgement of the erectile tissues around the external genitalia, the orb of the vestibule. I don't know if you remember those diagrams. That's going to increase secretion of the cervical mucus glands and the greater vestibular glands. The blood vessels in the vagina itself are going to start to fill up with blood. And that's going to move fluid from the underlying deeper tissues to the actual surface of the vagina. I lost my train of thought again. Okay. Female orgasm is accompanied by peristaltic contractions of the uterine and the vaginal walls. Rhythmic contractions of the bulbospongiosus and the ischiocavernosus muscles. And basically that is designed to take sperm that has been introduced into the vaginal cavity to move it up towards the cervix so it can get into the uterus. Because remember, we're trying to continue our species, so we want to make more of us, right? And so we have to have egg and sperm come together. And so that's what those contractions are trying to do. Now, there are plenty of reasons why you would either consciously not want this to happen, that's contraception, or you can't have it happen, that is infertility. Contraception, these are specific methods to prevent pregnancy. You don't want pregnancy to happen. Abstinence, barrier methods like diaphragms, intrauterine devices, many of those are release hormones. Some of them work by different processes. Chemical methods like birth controls, either the pill, there's little ampules that you can have inserted here. Surgical methods, tubal ligation, where you're actually severing and tying off those fallopian tubes so the eggs cannot get into position and the sperm cannot reach the eggs. Vasectomy in males is the same thing. Infertility is being unable to conceive or carry a pregnancy to term. And there's a number of reasons why that's possible. Structural defects in organs, in eggs, in sperm, in all sorts of stuff. It affects about 10% of the population here in the United States. And it happens in males and females. There it is. Okay. So it's not it's not just women or it's not just men. Okay. Now, in women, if you do not have menstruation, we had briefly talked about if it was painful or uncomfortable. If you don't have it, that's amenorrhea. Primary amenorrhea is you fail to start, so you don't have the cycle doesn't start. Okay. Transient would be interruptions or disruptions in those cycles, typically of 6 months or more. So remember, they're supposed to be regular cyclical about every 28 days, right? So if there's significant interruptions, that could be a problem. That can also be caused by several factors. Changes in weight, like weight loss, emotional stress, things like that. Very similar to those causes in erectile dysfunction in men. Okay, STDs, everybody's favorite topic. These are diseases that are transmitted by body fluids during sexual intercourse. They're also known as STIs, sexually transmitted infections. You'll probably see those two sets of acronyms used interchangeably with each other, okay? As you're transferred by individuals, there are loads of them. Bacterial, like chlamydia, viral, like syphilis, fungal infections. I can't think of any of those off the top of my head. HPV is one, genital warts. AIDS is another one. I'm sorry, HIV is another one. AIDS is a disease brought about by HIV infection. So they're actually two different things. What else? Changes in reproductive function. So we have the development of the genitals in males and females. Embryos for at 5 to 6 weeks of development, so early on, they're sexually indifferent. That means they're male or female has not been established yet. Genetically, we're all technically female until expression of those genes leads to the development of male or female genitalia. Gonads and similar starting internal external structures are similar at this point in both sexes. They haven't differentiated yet. Your genes, now it's primarily X and Y, but that's not the only thing. But the expression of those genes is what determines if you are anatomically male or female. In genetic males, embryonic testes begin secreting testosterone, which lead to the formation of male anatomy. In females, testosterone is not released, which is going to lead to the development of female reproductive organs. Here's a diagram that we have showing some of the changes that we see. So if we look up at the top here, this is the sort of shared, basically what we all look like for those first 4 or 5 weeks. From there, based on what hormones are released, either A, this genital tubercle right here gets larger, starts to fold in on itself, and the folds right here and here start to come together, and that's what eventually forms the urethra for males. In females, the genital tubercle ends up forming the two parts of the clitoris, and the folds right here end up becoming the labial folds that will enclose the external parts of the vagina, of the female reproductive parts. What else? Similar, there's similar structures down here with comparisons between males and females. there's structures that are kind of similar, but ultimately have different paths. But because they came from the same types of tissues, they do share a lot of similarities. Okay, so now we're talking about changes in reproductive function, or still talking about changes in reproductive function. Testes, male gonads, form within the body, okay, adjacent to the kidneys, and they will so this is during fetal development. Okay, they're going to form inside of the body, and then they're known as gubernaculum testes. Okay, and they're locked in position by bundles of connective tissue while the fetus is growing. During the 7th month, so towards the end of the pregnancy, the fetus is growing very, very fast. It's growing in size, very, very fast. Hormones are becoming more actively circulated throughout the body, which is going to stimulate the contraction of that connective tissue, and that's going to force the testes to move through the abdominal musculature of the cavity into the scrotum. Pockets of the peritoneal cavity are going to come with it, and they're going to form those other cavities that line the testes that we talked about in the male anatomy video. Effects of aging as we get older, because we all do it. The female reproductive system, we're talking about menopause, basically, and the changes that are associated with that. In males, there is sort of this idea of the male menopause. It just happens more gradually over a longer period of time. The male menopause is actually andropause, or male climacteric. And so basically that's a period of declining reproductive function. Just the parts aren't working as well as they used to. This is typically happening between the age of 50 and 60, so the onset is later in men than it is in women. Testosterone circulating through the blood begins to decrease. Follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are going to increase. Sperm production is still going to continue. However, sexual activity is going to gradually increase because that testosterone levels are decreasing. In females, it's menopause. Now, right before that happens is known as perimenopause. That's the immediately before menopause. Cycles become irregular. Gaps in those regular cycles are going to be start to happen with greater frequency. And what's happening is the ovaries are running out of primordial ovarian follicles. There's no more eggs left. Females are born with a certain limited number of eggs, and when your body runs out, you can kind of think of it like the organs begin to close up shop. There's no longer any need to go through this process anymore. This hormonal processes, because there's no more eggs to get rid of. Estrogen levels are going to start to decrease. Ovulation may or may not be triggered at this point. Then going into menopause, that's when ovulation and menstruation stop. The cycles no longer go anymore. This typically happens between 45 and 55, so the onset is a little bit earlier than in females. In 50, it's pretty common. There are no more ovarian follicles left. There's no more eggs left. We've run out. If this happens before the age of 40, this is known as premature menopause, and there's a lot of reasons why this sort of thing could happen. Estrogen and progesterone are going to decline. GnRH, FSH, and LH are going to increase very sharply. It's not uncommon at this point because we talked about how estrogen is responsible for muscle and nerve, bone formation. incidence of osteoporosis increase, especially in postmenopausal women, is what they would call it. And it has to do with these estrogen levels. One of the treatments is estrogen supplements, basically, to try to slow bone loss, basically. It also leads to reductions into the size of the uterus and the breasts, the thinning of the epithelial layers of the urethra and the vagina, the bone deposition that I had talked about. That's where the osteoporosis sets in. So in reproduction, I guess we're shifting gears a little bit now. A lot of things have to line up. It's actually kind of tricky. I'll leave it at that. There must be enough sperm. There have to be a correct pH and nutrients in the semen. Erection and ejaculation have to function properly. Any breakdown in any of those, reproduction becomes significantly more complicated. In females, the 2 cycles, ovarian and uterine, must coordinate properly with the proper releasing of the egg, the corpus luteum, that sort of thing. Transport of the oocyte must occur normally. There must not be any problems. It must end up where it's supposed to be within the uterine tube. The environment of the reproductive tract has to support the movement and survival of the sperm, the fertilization of the oocyte, and then the overall support of the embryo. It also requires normal functioning of not just the reproductive system, but the digestive system, endocrine system, because of the hormone-driven, the nervous system. If there's damage to the nervous system, you're not gonna see these sexual functions that were just discussed. Cardiovascular system, because a lot of this has to do with fluid movement, has to do with blood movement and stuff like that. Same thing with the urinary system. If you have blockage in the male urinary system, like if with an enlarged prostate, you're going to have significant effects in the reproductive system's ability to carry out its function. Even then, when all of this stuff is normal and everybody's healthy and stuff like that, the zygote still has to develop into a fully formed fetus. And if you've ever met anybody who has had a miscarriage for seemingly no reason whatsoever, you kind of know what you have an idea of what this feels like. A lot of times during pregnancy, couples and mothers will hold off on telling people that she's pregnant until after the first trimester, because the baby is more likely to be carried to full term after that point. Here is that infamous diagram that has all the different organ systems that shows those interactions between all the different organ systems. Integumentary system is important for the stimulatory elements, especially during sexual intercourse. Endocrine system is important for the hormone management of the different cycles and stuff like that. Lymphatic is there, skeletal is there. So go through, take a look at this, see how they're all connected to each other. And that does it for the reproductive system. We're in the home stretch. One more major unit after this. We're going to look about what happens when we get baby in the mama. What does it look like? What is the terms? Where do hearts and stuff come from? That'll be the last thing that we do, and then we will ride this thing out to the very end. If you have any questions, remind, email, office hours. Otherwise, I'm recording this on a Sunday. It's absolutely gorgeous outside. We set the pool up. I think I'm going to be there. So, y'all, you stay classy, Bex.